Right now, we're waiting to hear directly from President Trump about today's ruling. It amounts to a stinging and rare rebuke of a president by a Supreme Court that he himself appointed 3 justices to. Over the past year, the High Court has ruled in his favor in 20 out of the 24 emergency cases he has pushed them to decide, but not today. Joining me here in studio is Corey Brettschneider, professor of political science at Brown University and co-host of the podcast The Oath and the Office. Corey, so just your initial reaction of how significant of a defeat this is for the president.
It is a major defeat, and this is a historic day. The president has won so many of the cases in which he should have been stopped by the Supreme Court. Think of the immunity case, or think of, in the first term, the travel ban case. But now the Supreme Court of the United States has said no more. You're on a power grab. You're trying to use emergency powers that don't exist. And no, in our system, the lawmaking power and the taxation power, the idea of no taxation without representation, rests with the lawmaking body, with Congress. And so it is a very clear rebuke. He was trying to use this statute, IEPA, which was actually designed in the 1970s to rein in presidents, to expand his own power and to impose tariffs at will. And the court, thankfully, has said in a victory for the Constitution and the American people, no, you can't just destroy the other branches because you're the president.
Right. IEPA being I just want to say it out loud for folks, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, so from the 1970s. And I want to read to you one of the pieces that Justice Neil Gorsuch, a Trump appointee, warned about in the ruling about the separation of powers in a concurrence. And he said, quote, "Without doctrines like major questions, our system of separated powers and checks and balances threatens to give way to the continual and permanent accretion of powers in the hands of one man. That is no recipe for a republic." So what do you think this tells us about this majority conservative court now saying that there have to be checks and balances between the executive, the judiciary, and the legislative?
Well, I would say, first of all, very clearly, thank you, Justice Gorsuch. Welcome to the resistance, that he sees the danger of Trump's power grab, of dictatorship, and he's pushed back. And he's used this doctrine, a kind of obscure legal doctrine, major questions doctrine, that had always been used to constrain executive agencies. And now what he's saying, and the court is saying, is this is actually a constraint on the president. And what it says is simple, that if Congress hasn't clearly authorized the president to do things like enact tariffs, he or she can't, that the power remains with Congress. And so this major questions doctrine, which frankly had been seen as a conservative idea to rein in agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, which Justice Gorsuch isn't fond of, is now being used to rein in a president. And that's part of why this is historic, because we've been given tools to reclaim the power of Congress, to rein in presidential power.
Why do you think this ruling, this rebuke was so strong that they actually on this case said no to the president when they've ruled with him so many other times before?
You know, in this case, it was so clear. I had an amicus brief, and I talked about it on the Oath and the Office podcast. The idea that you would take a law that was actually after Nixon meant to rein in presidential power and reclaim the power of Congress, powers that in historic cases like the Youngstown case, the Supreme Court had affirmed in its most basic place, no taxation without representation, as I said before. I really think that a sensible and principled Supreme Court didn't have an alternative. If you look at the dissent, at Justice Kavanaugh's dissent, or Justice Alito and Justice Thomas, what they really were recommending was handing over all power to the president. And we don't live in a dictatorship. We live under a constitution with the rule of law in which Congress has a central role. And now, thankfully, this has been upheld. I don't want to be naive. They have, in the immunity case and the travel ban, handed over a lot of power, way too much power. But hopefully this is the beginning of reining it back in. And we, the people, have to demand more of this sort of thing.
Do you think that this is going to embolden lower courts? Because many lower courts have ruled against the Trump administration prior to this, accusing the administration of violating, or ruling that the administration has violated the law in certain cases. So do you think this is going to open the door for more rebukes?
It's such an important point, because the lower courts, the district courts, the courts of appeal have actually been pretty good in saying things like, we're not just going to allow unlimited power. Take, for instance, the attempt to use the 1798 Enemy Aliens Act at will to deny even the writ of habeas corpus, basic constitutional and legal ideas. Now, they're not just looking to the court as an institution that undermines the attempt to enforce the law against a president. They have a major ruling that says, in this case, the president can't do anything he or she wants. The President Trump, in particular, can't do anything that he wants. And that's got to send a message that, yes, you are doing the right thing in policing this administration and not just giving things up. Under the shadow docket, where the Supreme Court doesn't give full arguments, it often has just handed over power after power after power. And now, as it's forced to write an opinion, it's not a coincidence, it's reining it back in. And that's a good thing. And as your question indicates, it sends a great message to the lower courts.
It'll be fascinating to see how those lower courts react in practice. Corey Brettschneider, thank you. Coming up, we'll get the latest on reaction on Capitol Hill to the major decision.